Alright guys, I'm back. So I made a video last time about, or short video about vaccine cynicism. And what I mean by that is that just how we gatekeep vaccines from other people for various reasons. And so, with that being said, this has nothing to do with how vaccines work or not. Um, so let's get into this. So, I would consider this a form of necropolitics. So, a dose of reality. How rich countries and pharmaceutical corporations are breaking their vaccine promises. Developing countries have been hit with an endless tide of inadequate gestures and broken promises from rich countries and pharmaceutical companies who are failing to deliver billions of doses they promised while blocking the real solutions to vaccine inequality. According to a new report published today by the People's Vaccine Alliance, the report, A Dose of Reality, found that of 1.8 billion COVID vaccine donations promised by the rich countries, only 261 million doses, 14% have been delivered to date, while Western pharmaceutical companies have been delivered only 12% of the doses they allocated to COVAX. The initiative designed to help low and middle income countries get fair access to COVID vaccines. At the same time, the EU and other rich countries have refused to support the proposal of over 100 nations to waive patients on vaccines and COVID-related technologies, while leading pharmaceutical companies have failed to openly share their technologies with the World Health Organization to enable developing countries to make their own vaccines and save lives. Winnie Byanyima, executive director of UNAID, said rich countries and corporations are shamefully failing to deliver on their promises whilst blocking the actual solutions, ensuring developing nations have the ability to make their own vaccines. Quote, it is painfully clear that the developing world cannot rely on the largesse and charity of rich nations and pharmaceutical companies, and hundreds of thousands of people are dying from COVID-19 as a result. This is beyond appalling. The UK government, which has been actively blocking calls from countries like South Africa and India to be allowed to make their own vaccines, has only delivered 9.6 million, less than 10% of the 100 million doses it promised to poorer nations. Meanwhile, it has itself taken 500,000 doses from COVAX, despite extreme vaccine shortages in developing countries, and having already secured then more than enough doses for British people from direct deals with the pharmaceutical companies. Canada has taken over 970,000 doses from COVAX while delivering only 3.2 million, or 8%, of the 40 million doses it promised. Germany, another country blocking the waiver, has delivered 12% of the 100 million doses it promised, and France has delivered just 9% of the 102 million it promised. The US has delivered the most doses, nearly 177 million doses. However, this is just 16% of the 1.1 billion promised. The alliance said while the COVAX failed to acknowledge that relying on pharmaceutical companies may not deliver doses, the companies have undermined the initiative. First, by not allocating it enough doses, and second, by delivering far less than they agreed. Of the 994 million doses allocated to the COVAX by Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, Oxford, AstraZeneca, and Pfizer and BioNTech, only 102 million, 12% have actually been delivered, which is 15 times less than the 1.8 billion doses delivered to rich countries from those companies. Both Johnson & Johnson and Moderna are yet to deliver a single dose they promised to the initiative. Oxfam's Robbie Silverman said, the failure of rich countries' donations and the failure of COVAX have the same root cause. We have given our control of vaccine supply to a small number of pharmaceutical companies who are prioritizing their own profits. These companies can't provide enough vaccine to vaccinate the world. They are artificially constraining the supply, and they will always put the rich customers at the front of the line. The only way to end the pandemic is to share the technology. the know-how with other qualified manufacturers so that everyone, everywhere can have access to these life-saving vaccinations. During the UN General Assembly in September, President Biden rallied support for the goal to vaccinate 70% of people in every country by September of 2022. While this target is rightly ambitious, the People's Vaccine Alliance says it should be achieved much more quickly, and there is still no plan to achieve it. The WHO stated that must be a global priority to get doses to developing countries by the end of this year, but the alliance says rich countries are not listening and working to a timetable of delivering on inadequate supply of doses by the same time in 2022, which is likely to lead countries to countless unnecessary deaths. Maza Siom of the African Alliance of the People's Vaccine Alliance, Africa, said, across the world, health workers are dying and children are losing parents and grandparents, with 99% of the people in low-income countries still not vaccinated. We have had enough of these too little gestures. Quote, governments must stop allowing pharmaceutical companies to play God while raking in astronomical profits and start delivering actual action that will save lives. To deflect growing pressure to share their vaccine technology free of intellectual property restrictions, leading Western pharmaceutical corporations have consistently over-exaggerated their projected production volumes, claiming they will soon be there will soon be enough for everyone while delivering the overwhelming majority of their stock to rich nations. Collectively, the four companies claimed they would manufacture an estimated 7.5 billion vaccines in 2021, yet with less than 3 months until the end of this year, they only delivered half of these. Forecasts suggest the companies will produce 6.2 billion vaccines by the end of this year, a shortfall on the projection of more than 1.3 billion doses. With a week to go before leaders meet the G20 summit in Rome, the People's Vaccine Alliance, which has 77 members including ActionAid, the African Alliance, Global Justice Now, Oxfam, and UNAIDS, is calling on them to stop breaking the promises to vaccinate the world and to, quote, suspend intellectual property rights for COVID vaccines, tests, treatments, and other medical tools by agreeing to the proposed waiver of the TRIPS agreement at the World Trade Organization. Demand the use of all their legal and policy tools to require pharmaceutical companies to share COVID-19 data, know-how, and technology with the WHO's COVID-19 Technology Access Pool and South Africa's mRNA Technology Transfer Hub. Invest in decentralized manufacturing hubs in developing countries to move from a world of vaccine monopolies and scarcity to one of vaccine sufficiency and fairness in which developing countries have direct control over production and capacity to meet their needs. And immediately redistribute existing vaccines equitably across all nations to achieve the WHO target of vaccinating 40% of people in all countries by the end of 2021 and 70% of people in all countries by 2022. So, I'm going to guess that none of these goals got done at all. And for the most part, I think it's kind of bullshit that they can't find workers and manufacturing to get this done somewhere. This is why I think this is a type of unregulated neoliberal market mishandling, like malpractice, but it's legal. Like it's medical malpractice that's legal. And I believe this is like a type of potential population control, guys. Like they're talking about not letting like African countries and people with high population rates to be healthier. And I'm just guessing, like there's no other fucking reason why they wouldn't allocate this further. Alright. So, in the next article, I found this pretty messed up, guys. So, This is a pretty touchy topic, and hardliners may say, like, yeah, um, the Social Security and the medical system that we're holding up the elderly with, it could potentially be a burden, but I think that's pretty immoral compared to where most of the wealth is in terms of all the elites that are, allowing us to suffer with our scraps that we get. So I still wouldn't blame this on the elderly, even though there is like almost like age warfare. Like there's elderly people that are saying like the youth are just selfish and have it easy, and to some level we have it easy, but I don't think the age warfare should be like the ticket to killing all of them. I'm just saying that right now, guys. Like I know that we have a geriatric empire and that needs to be stopped. Like, but how else are we gonna do it? Like, you can't just like there's a lot of elderly people that are still working because of pension reform, and as soon as all of them are gone, like the economy would it would surely collapse. Like, come on, guys. Like, I don't think there's machines on standby waiting to be turned on as soon as a whole chunk of the working class is taken out. Okay. The elderly and COVID-19, cocooning or culling, the choice is ours. An English newspaper journalist suggested coronavirus could be mildly beneficial to the English economy by killing off the elderly. In his column, Jeremy Warner analyzed the USA making an emergency interest rate cut to protect the economy against coronavirus. He compared coronavirus with Spanish flu and how the 1918 pandemic disproportionately affected young people, unlike the 19 COVID-19 strain, which primarily kills the elderly. Warner reasoned Spanish flu had a lasting impact on supply because it killed off primarily breadwinners, which he said is unlikely to happen with coronavirus. Then he added, not to put too fine a point on it, from an entirely disinterested economic perspective, the COVID-19 might even prove mildly beneficial in the long term by disproportionately culling elderly dependents. This wording right here is pretty disgusting, and now you can say it's true. It's true in a cold, logical sense, but like, how are you supposed to allow that to merely just affect like, that's sick. Literally. I've been wanting to actually read this article to you guys for a while. Like, I can't believe this was actually, this thought process was actually looming. Personally, after reading The Birth Earth, this made sense all along, as it did blame the elderly a little bit for the burden of the Social Security and that and combining that with blaming women for not having enough children. Like, this logic of this article literally comes from The Birth Earth almost. Seriously. Okay, weighed down by this depressing attitude towards older people, and wondering how to lift myself out of this deep utilitarian hole, I turned to the 17th of March, St. Patrick's Day addresses by Ireland's Taoiseach Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, who said that at some stage in the coming weeks, the government will advise the elderly to stay at home for several weeks, and systems are being put in place to ensure they have food and are checked on. He told the country the measure would save many lives, particularly the most vulnerable and most precious in our society. We call it cocooning. I was uplifted by the word cocooning, referring to the safe and ongoing care to be given to the vulnerable elderly, a gentler and kinder word than culling. Well, obviously, what? It's not even the same. It's not even a. Okay, wow. I was equally heartened on reading what 14,000 bioethicists and health leaders wrote in a letter to the White House and U.S. Congress on the 22nd or 21st of March. The letter, organized by the New York-based Hastings Center. Oh, sorry, I'm reading this fast, guys. I gotta get to work soon. I still wanted to get through this though. The letter, organized by the New York-based Hastings Center, a bioethics research institute, said responses to pandemics reveal the values and beliefs of a nation. Ethics requires that moral agents act to prevent preventable harms, that we recognize the equal worth of all members of society, that we take special care of the most vulnerable among us. Ethicists cautioned against a purely utilitarian calculus that does not include the dignity of all people. Any discrimination based on age, disability, or wealth would be immoral. A patient's age may be part of a medical evaluation, but it cannot be in itself a sufficient criterion for refusing treatment. Dr. Andrea Ficini, a medical doctor and professor of moral theology at Boston College, wrote that a pandemic such as the COVID-19 one is a reminder that health is not an individual good but a social one. The end does not justify the means. The means must be good and the ends must be good. Ireland's Ministry of Health document reiterates this point. Utilizing the multi-principled approach can temper the classic utilitarian approach of allocating resources based on the greatest good for the greatest number, taking into account a fair distribution of benefits and burdens. Categorical exclusion, e.g. on the basis of age, should be avoided, as this can imply that some groups are worth saving more than others and creates a perception of unfairness. And also, once you start working on a plan to just cull the elderly behind the scenes, who's stopping this policy from focusing on somebody else from behind the scenes? Like, I kind of was talking to my coworker about this, and I told him it wouldn't stop at the elderly. It would literally keep on going. Because this is kind of how quotas work. And for the most part, when it came to population culling, it doesn't always work. It just doesn't. Okay. COVID-19 has uncovered the reality of how truly we care about the elderly and the vulnerable. How far will we go to protect them? My recent research with first-year doctors' experience of ethical issues at the end of life revealed what they considered a disturbing underlying attitude. A doctor in her first 3 months of clinical practice described feeling great distress at the poor care of the elderly and a sense of responsibility to improve that care. The distress was such that she considered leaving medicine. It is very complex. There's a lot of egoism or ageism in that I found very difficult to deal with. I just think that the older patients were treated inappropriately. There were lots of clashes of values. I don't know whether it's ageism or it's discrimination. Well, it's discrimination against elderly people and discrimination against people who are at the end of their lives that dissimilar. Or are they that dissimilar? Well, people sometimes just expect different things based on how they grew up. So, I mean, I guess it's kind of like people might think you're weird if you're not the person they expect a certain kindness from. But obviously, like the end of your life death, end of your life care, I mean, this is a bit of like an opinion greater than just how you were raised, I think. Because you're aging and your deathbed is not next to the time how you were raised. And I know that makes no sense. What I'm trying to say is that times are different as you're dying. And so you got to deal with that and cope with that. It is kind of like if you were dying when you were being like younger based on how your family was, it would be a lot less stressful, I think. You would know how to die. But since families are fractured and everything is sort of like individuated, and you are your own responsibility, well, technically the elderly are a national responsibility, but anyways, individuated, and we're all disconnected from each other. So uh, it's kind of hard. There is no actual communication outside of just an official system just kind of telling you how it is, because people used to just do it on their own, deal with it in their own way, and it is kind of disturbing, I assume, for the elderly in some way when they're lost and confused and they have dementia, but they knew how things used to be. But I mean, I'm getting off topic here. All right, I'll be back in the next one.